Hello, everyone, and welcome to our budgeting talk with Comet Cents Money Management here at the University of Texas at Dallas. I hope you all are having a great week. We got a cold front in finally, so the weather is a little bit cooler. My name is Derek Jackson, and I am the program specialist with the Office of Undergraduate Education here at UT Dallas First Generation Student Programs. And I'm so excited to be with you all this morning. In a little bit, I will hand it off to Sandra, who will be leading our presentation today. But before that, I just want to say that this is a fantastic program at UT Dallas. I highly recommend you check them out after this presentation and start to implement some of the strategies here, because take it from me, someone in their late 20s, budgeting and being smart about your money and finances will really change your life for the better. So I'm super excited. Welcome, everyone. And without further ado, I would like to hand it off to Sandra. Sandra, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Derek. So yes, this is a budgeting presentation. I'm so happy to be giving it to y'all. Budgeting, like Derek said, is something that can change your life. Even though you probably are familiar and you've heard of the word budgeting and you've heard it thrown around in different, situations and circles and things like that. But in this presentation, I'll be breaking down the specifics of how to budget and also just how to have maybe a different view of how money can work in your life and how it can be a tool that you can use and not something that you have to feel afraid of or something that you have to feel constrained by. So yeah, just a little bit about me. I'm a peer advisor with the Comet Cents Money Management Office. It's a peer-to-peer service that offers UT Dallas students, as you guys are, financial literacy tools. I am a neuroscience major, but I'm extremely passionate about personal finance because I personally have grown leaps and bounds in my personal finance journey since I came to UT Dallas, and I'm extremely passionate about making personal finance accessible to everyone. Because I personally am a first-generation American, and I didn't really know anything about finances when I came to college, and learning about finances and learning how to navigate personal finances has been a huge thing in my life. So I'm happy to share what our office has and what I've learned with you all. So before we begin, I kind of wanted to talk about money mindset. So what that is, or what I kind of want to get at, is especially as first generation students or first generation citizens or Americans or whatever it is, or maybe you're not first generation and you're just like, Sandra, I don't I don't have any sort of patterns or anything that I do with money. So a couple questions and ideas that I kind of thought I would prompt with is just, as you go about creating your budget and as you go about the process of starting to want to budget, is thinking about how you feel about money. There's no right or wrong way to think about money or feel about money, because ultimately, as you'll see by the end of the presentation, money is a tool and it can help you in your life. It doesn't have to be something that's constraint or something that you have negative feeling towards, because being able to track your money can help you have a more positive outlook on money and help you feel more free to live the lifestyle that you want to live, without the constraints of feeling bogged down by your budget or money. And then the second thing is, how did your community view money growing up? Maybe your community, maybe the reason you're listening to this call or to this Teams meeting, is because your community had a different view of money growing up, and you want to try and explore different ways to think about budgeting, or to maybe do something different that maybe people in your community didn't do or your family didn't do. And the third thing that I want to emphasize, the third and fourth things that I want to emphasize, especially for first generation students or people who are new to, maybe you're one of the first in your family to actually start thinking about money in this way, but is to give yourself grace and know that you deserve the money that you're making, and you deserve to be able to have a positive outlook on money and to use it as a tool and actually set goals and live the lifestyle that you want for yourself. Oftentimes, when I talk to first generation students or even just my own friends and peers and stuff, it can be really easy to just want to hoard all of the money and not spend it on anything and not go out or not do anything like that. But hopefully by the end of this presentation, you can see that if when you budget your money and track it, you can still save and still have room in your budget to, eat out, have fun with friends, but in a way that you're able to track where your money is going and it's not getting away from you. So all of these things are perfectly possible with a budget, and they can all help in creating a healthier mindset about money and about budgeting. So the first thing is to actually give a definition. What is budgeting? So in long term, a budget is an itemized list of your income and your expenses for a given period. Now, what that means in like regular people talk is that a budget is just a list of how much you make, what you're spending it on, and you decide the period. So I personally do a biweekly budget because I get paid biweekly. So it's just easier for me to see every 2 weeks I make this much and every 2 weeks I spend this much. And I do it in the span of a month. So I kind of make there's 2 columns in my budget for the month of October, for example. Other people do monthly budgets. Maybe you write down, I get paid in total, this is how much I get paid in this month, and this is how much I spent in this month. So the period is up to you. Whatever, like I always like to say, whatever the best budget is the budget you're going to actually check and is the budget you're actually going to use. So if it's easier for you to think about it every single paycheck or every single pay period, I highly encourage you to do that. And if it's easier to think about it every month, again, I highly encourage you to do that. Whatever the period is, as long as you're making sure you have a list of what your income is and you have a list of what your expenses are, it can get you on track to being able to create a budget. And like the PowerPoint says, it's an invaluable tool to help you prioritize your spending and manage your money. So the first step to creating a budget and to beginning this journey of tracking your finances is sometimes the hardest one, oftentimes, at least in my experience, but it's to actually gather your money details. So especially as students, because students' income can vary from semester to semester, depending on the job you're working. Maybe you end up working more in the summer than in the school year. Maybe you're working 2 jobs, even 3 jobs, and it's hard to try and keep everything streamlined and keep track of everything. So this could be maybe the most laborious step depending on your situation, but it's the most essential step because ultimately at the end of the day, how much money you're able to spend in your budget is dependent on how much you make. So even just having a good idea of how much you make will help you have a better idea of what you can spend in different categories and things like that. So in terms of gathering your money details as a college student, one of the things is if your parents are helping you pay for college in any way, shape, or form, maybe it's not tuition, but maybe they help pay for your gas, maybe you're living at home and you don't pay for food because your parents cook. Even though you're not paying for food, so it's not a money detail, but having that in the back of your head that in my budget, I don't have to necessarily account for groceries because I don't pay for groceries, even that is a helpful thing to help you start thinking about. So talking to your parents, if they're helping you cover college expenses, it doesn't have to be perfect conversation. You don't have to sit down with your parents and say, hey, look, here's my budget, here's how it's gonna go. But just asking and kind of having an understanding in your head of what their contributions may look like towards your education can help you decide what your budget is going to include. The second thing for college students is to review your scholarship, grants, and loans. So these are other things. If you're using any one of those things to help cover your expenses in college, I would include them in your budget because those scholarship, grants, and loans are going to count as your income. Even though it's not a job and you're not necessarily working for it, it still counts as income because it's going to be money that you're using to spend on something. So that's why I include it as part of your income and your money details. And then the third thing is estimate how much you'll make from employment. So if you're working part-time or anything like that, every single and multiple jobs, from every single job that you have, estimate how much you'll make from your employment. If you're not quite sure because you work varying hours, or maybe you work as a waiter or waitress and it's tip based and it's, a little bit variable, what I recommend and what I'll recommend continuously throughout this presentation is to look back at your past 3 pay periods and kind of estimate and look back and see how much you got paid those past 3 pay periods and know how many hours you worked. So that way you can make an estimate of, I worked this X amount of hours and I made this much money. So in the future, I'll probably make, the same X amount of hours, this much money. And it can also help you in terms of calculating like the tax and stuff on your income, because I know sometimes that can be a little bit tricky if, tax is taken off your income and you're not quite sure what it'll be. But looking back at your past income statements can help you figure that out. So yeah, the 3 things in gathering your money details, just to summarize: talking to your parents, reviewing scholarship grants and loans, and then estimating how much you're going to make from employment. The second thing to consider when budgeting and trying to list out what your budget is going to look like is your expenses. So in essence, a good budget is going to have 3 things. A good budget is going to have step 1, your income, so how much you're going to be making. Step 2, your expenses, how much you actually spend. And step 3, your estimate. So the reason I include estimate is because maybe in the beginning, your budget only has step 1 and step 2. So maybe in the beginning, your budget is going to actually look more just like a spending tracker. I made this much amount of money and I spent this much amount of money. I spent this much money and here's what I have left. And that's really good and that's really healthy, and that can help you start getting on track. But eventually, or even right now, a budget can work and be a predictor. It can help you try and stay within the constraints of your finances by adding like a 3rd category, which is setting like estimates in your budget. So what I mean by that is, suppose you make $400 in a month and you spend, $350 on groceries, eating out, etc. In the 3rd category, what you can do before you even, if you create a budget, if I'm creating a budget for next month, for example, for November, I can start to predict and say that, okay, for the month of November, I would like to only spend $15 eating out. That's really small, but I only like to spend $15 eating out. So that way I can write that on a piece of paper or however I'm budgeting, and use that to kind of motivate myself to only spend $15 every month, because I know it's feasible for me, because I know how much I've spent in the past. So yeah, that's why step 2 is the expenses. So we talked about income and we're going to talk about the expenses next. So college expenses to consider are tuition and fees, school supplies, rent or a place to live, food, gas and transportation. This includes like toll tags and things like that, clothing, and fund money, or just, personal money. And of course, this is not an all exhaustive list. There's things like, insurance and all kinds of things, appliances, utilities, depending on where you live in your situation. But any sort of, and, subscription services and things like that, but any sort of expense that you have, you want to be able to write it down. Towards the end of the presentation, I'll have examples of how other people organize their budgets, so it can give you an idea of how you want to write it down. But even as simple as creating just a few categories of expenses, so you can put maybe necessary expenses and then flexible expenses, and just marking things down under which your expenses are. Or maybe you just want to use your bank's app and just make sure that you print out your expenses at the end of every single month or something like that to see how much you're spending. Either one of those things could be a good option. So a few budgeting tools. Now that we talked about the income and expenses, there's digital tools. There's a free app called Mint that is really popular. I used to use it for a while. And Mint, kind of similar to your bank app, if you have a bank app on your phone, tracks the, you can have it track like your spending automatically. If you connect it to your bank account, or if you don't want to connect it to your bank account, you want to manually put it in, you can do that. And it'll create these like graphs and things like that. In the Mint app, it also helps you create that third category really easily by saying, like, for example, if I use the Mint app for the month of November, I can say, in November, I only want to spend $15 on eating out. And if I go to, Chipotle or something and I spend $8, the Mint app will automatically send you a notification and say, you spent $8, you have $7 left in your eating out category. And that was really helpful because it kind of makes it a little bit more real because it's tracking it for you and it's sending you notifications about how much money you have left in your own set budget. And you can, of course, change it and do all these different things. But it's really convenient because it's on your phone. It'll track it for you. It'll create these pie charts and graphs and things like that. So you can see if you're doing good or not good or not, but like you can see if you're following your budget. It can identify how much you're saving every month, if you're saving money or losing money. So I highly recommend. If you don't want to use a digital tool and you like old-fashioned pen and paper, also you can do the very same thing. You can take your piece of paper and a pen. You can make 3 columns, one for your expenses, kind of like this, one for your income, and then one for what's left over to see if you made your budget or if you didn't make your budget, and to see if you went over budget or under budget. So that's a good way to kind of track your budget and kind of track your spending and saving habits. A pro tip, this is also another like college student budget kind of template that we found, and it's also really nice because it's pretty clear, pretty clean, and it can help you, especially for those of you who are wanting to use pen and paper, kind of map out the different columns. I like this one in particular because it has an expected column. So it's kind of that third column that I was talking about earlier. So you can write down how much you actually spent, and it has it based off of income and expenses. So you can write down how much you actually got in financial aid and from your job and, from extra money, how much you expected to get and the difference. And then the same thing with expenses. You can write down how much you actually spent, what you were expecting to spend, and the difference. And ideally, in order to make sure that you have money left over and that you're saving, you want your actual spending to be less than your expected spending. So that way the difference is positive and you have leftover money. And like I said in the very beginning, a pro tip is that if you don't know what your expected expenses are or your expected income is, go back and look at your bank history. You can do that online or through your bank's phone app and look at your history for the past 2 months or maybe the past 3 pay periods or however far back you want to look, and make a rough estimate and use that to predict your expected expenses and income in the future if you don't know what that is. So that's something that you can do. And you can also print it out if it makes it easier. When I first made my budget, quite a while ago now, but when I first started doing it, I printed it out and I would like highlight. I'd use different highlighters. So I highlighted what I spent on food places. I got a different color, and I highlighted what I spent on like clothes. I got a different color, highlighted how much I spent on gas. And it kind of helped me organize the numbers a lot more easily and accurately predict what I thought I would be expected to spend in the next month. So you can do that too. So yeah, this is just another example of what that looks like for people. This is definitely a lot more simple example, but like I said earlier, the best budget is the one that you're going to check and the one that's going to actually help you start thinking about tracking your money. So even if it looks as simple as just you want to start out by just keeping track of what you're spending and what you're making, that's perfectly fine, because ultimately getting in the habit of just keeping track of what you're making and what you're spending is going to get you on track to start thinking about how to incorporate savings and how to make your budget a little bit a work for you and start tracking your money in a healthy way. So yeah, identify your income, like I said, list your expenses, plan for any long-term or future expenditures, which is what we'll talk about in a few slides, and then set financial goals, which we'll also talk about in a few slides. So to recap, we've mainly identified a few things. A good budget is going to, in order to make a good budget or a good money tracker, you want to identify your income, you want to list all of your expenses, and then you want to predict future expenses or kind of estimate future expenses. And the order in which you would do that is ideally you would identify your income first. If you're a new budget maker, you would go back and look at what your old expenses were, so that way you can write down your expected expenses for the next month. And then as you go throughout the month and you're spending, or maybe you want to do it twice a month or however often you want to update your budget, you would go through and identify what your expenses are and what you've been spending and things like that. So that way at the end of the month or at the end of the pay period or however often you check your budget, you can see if your expenses went beyond what you were expecting, it went beyond your budget and you went over budget, or you can see if you went under budget. So for the next two things, planning for any long-term or future expenditures and setting financial goals, those two things are kind of both related to savings, which is what we'll talk about in the next slide. Oh yeah, and tell every dollar where to go and pay yourself first, which is also part of savings. And put money aside for savings and emergencies. All of those five things will be a part of savings. Yeah, so getting into the specifics of percentages and things like that, I know that's really helpful, for some people. But also, just as a caveat, if it's overwhelming for you to start looking at percentages and start thinking about how to track percentages, no worries. It's okay. You can definitely just start out with using your budget as a money tracker and just see if you can get into the habit of tracking where your money's going, how much you're spending on certain things. And even that can be really helpful, because if you're realizing, oh, I'm spending a lot of money eating out, even just knowing that information and then just telling yourself to cut down on the information is super helpful, because ultimately at the end of the day, a budget or a money tracker or whatever is there to make sure that you know where your money's going and you're able to have control and, cut down or spend more in places that you choose. Because ultimately a budget is here to give you a choice and to allow money to be a tool for you. So, but for those of you who want percentages and are looking for that, we have some specifics that we recommend. You can try breaking up your budget into these 5 categories. So maybe if you're paying rent, you can try and make sure that about 35% of your income is going towards your rent, about 20% is going towards transportation if you have transportation, 20% for personal expenses, 15% for debt. If you're still in school and not paying debt, towards your loans, that won't apply to you, but even if you have things like credit debt, this can apply to you. And then 10% towards investment and savings, which is really important because, as I mentioned in the last slide, and as I'll talk about in this slide a little bit more, making sure that you include savings in your budget isn't something that a lot of students do, or honestly a lot of young people do, just because we tend to think we won't need it. But it can be really, it's really beneficial to start setting aside savings early, and to start setting aside savings and making it a habit. That way, when you get older, or even if just something happens, you have that money set aside, so that way you can use it and you're not left in a tight spot or a tight situation. But with savings, a good philosophy and a good rule of thumb is to make sure that you pay yourself first with savings. So what that means is, suppose you get paid at the beginning of the pay period, you want to make sure that we'll talk about it a little bit later, but you want to make sure that your needs are covered and then your savings are covered. And then you can start going towards flexible expenses. So what that means is, if you get paid, you want to make sure that rent is covered. You want to make sure that any sort of insurance that you're paying is covered. You want to make sure things like your phone bill are covered, utilities are covered, things that you most absolutely need are covered. And then you want to make sure that you put some money away towards your savings. It doesn't have to be 10%. It can be a little less if that's all you want to do, but just putting some away, so that way you have an emergency fund, a rainy day fund, or you just get in the habit of saving income, so that way if something happens, maybe you lose your job, maybe you don't qualify for a grant next semester or something like that, you have some money saved and set aside for you to be able to use in the future. Another popular budgeting rule is the 50-30-20 rule. Oh, this last one should say 20, excuse me, but it's 50, 30, 20. 50% of your income will go towards necessities. And this, like I said, is what you want to pay first when you get paid or whenever you start using your income. You want to make sure your necessities are covered first. 30% of your income should go towards entertainment and personal expenses, and then 20% of the income goes towards savings and debt repayment. So in the order in which you want to actually start paying these or start allotting money towards these things is you want your necessities to be first, because you want to make sure you have a place to live, you have food, you have transportation, etc. And then the second thing that you want to do is you want to allot some of your income towards savings and towards debt repayment. So if you have credit card debt, if you are starting to save, which hopefully you will be encouraged to start saving after this, even if it's just a little bit. It can be 5%. It can be not even a percentage. It could be every single paycheck you say, I'm going to set aside $20 if you want to start there. Things add up really quickly. So you'll be really surprised how much you'll have by the end of the year. Well, maybe not this year. You'll have $40 by the end of this year if you do $20 monthly, but still $40 is more than $0. But you'll be surprised how quickly things add up once you start putting away a portion of your income immediately. And then it also keeps you more disciplined if you go in that order. If you pay your necessities first and then you pay savings and debt second, and then entertainment and personal expenses third. Because when you do entertainment and personal expenses third, with the leftover money that you have, you're not stressed about having to come up with money to pay for your necessities and towards savings and debt. And it can kind of allow you to be a lot more free when allotting money towards entertainment and personal expenses, because you know that no matter what, you've already covered your necessities, you've already covered your savings and debt. So now the rest of the money is for you to allot however you want. And it allows you to be a lot more flexible in your budgeting. So you can decide if you want, your budget can be, I'm budgeting this much towards necessities, this much towards savings and debt, and the rest of it just goes to however I want to spend it. I know people who do that and it works great for them because it's a lot less to track and it's a lot easier because they know they cover their necessities. But it can also help you if you want to leftover money and you're trying to save for a trip or something like that. You can start to, allocate the leftover money that you have accordingly to try and make sure that you have enough money to save for a trip or for, a gift or something like that. But as a rule of thumb for budgeting, making sure that you cover your necessities first and then savings and debt repayment second, and then everything else third, will help you stay in the clear almost all of the time. And especially if you're a beginning budgeter, it is a really great way to start getting into the habit of just right off the bat, making sure you're good and you're covered and you can use your money however you want afterwards. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, resources, or I guess in the middle, resources that we have are the Mint app that we recommend. But in general, the Mint app will help you create and manage spending goals. It helps you monitor your credit score. If you have a credit card, and even if you don't have a credit card but you do have debt, that will also show up on your credit score, so you can see that. The Mint app, like I mentioned in my example, helps you receive alerts for late payments, large purchases, or bill reminders. It gives you a weekly summary report, so that's really cool because you get to see, were you actually following your budget that week, or you get to see if you were spending way too much on one category that you hadn't intended to spend. And it also has investment features for those of you who are interested in investing. So highly recommend the Mint app, but you can use any sort of budgeting app that you feel like works for you and connects with you and does the things you want it to do. This is kind of what the app looks like, or not kind of, this is definitely what the app looks like, of course, with a few adjustments and updates and things like that. But it'll show you over here on the right-hand side in the budgeting area, at the beginning of the month or bi-weekly or however often you decide to set the budget, you can set you can set like a cap for how much you want to spend. And as you go throughout that pay period or you go throughout that time duration, it'll show you how much you're spending and see how much you have left and give you notifications about it to see if you're going, and it'll help you keep in mind if you're maybe moving too fast or spending too quickly and you want to spread out your spending and things like that. This little pie chart in the middle is what I like about the app, especially because I'm a very visual person. So it shows you by color what you kind of spent most of the month and what that looks like. And then the account overview gives you an overview of like the cash, credit and debt, your budget, your cash flow, etc. And it also has helpful personal finance tips and stuff like that in the app. So that is an option. Another resource, an option, or I guess two resources, an option, is to use your bank's banking app. A lot of people I know have banking apps on their phone. So if you already have it on your phone, you can actually, if you scroll towards the bottom for most apps, at the very bottom, you can see what the your spending habits are, and they track it very similarly to Mint. They'll create these little pie charts and things like that for you to kind of see where your spending is going. It's kind of a little bit different than Mint because they usually don't have it as extensive as the Mint app is, but it is very simple. So if it's easier for you because you already have the app on your phone, it'll be a great resource for you, especially for those of you who want to get started by just tracking your money and spending. It's a great resource to track your money and spending. And it also has been tracking it. Like your banking app, this is not something you have to opt into. It's been doing it automatically. So if you want to go into your bank app like today or right now and look in your past month's histories, it's already been tracking that information. So you can see, and it's already been categorizing that information. So you can see what you've been spending in different categories and things like that. Without having to do too much digging or searching. So it is a really helpful tool. And it's also available online too, not just on your app on your phone. Another resource that I found for y'all is a Google Sheet. I know some people are Google Sheet trackers. I use it to track studying, not for my budget, but that's why I put it as an option. This Google Sheet in particular, I thought was really helpful because it goes month by month and you can plug in what you actually spent, what you're expecting to spend, and whether or not you made your budget or not. And then the Excel spreadsheet will automatically calculate whether or not you stayed in budget or under budget, how much you have in your savings, how much you're saving every month, and it'll start compiling. Like suppose you put aside $20 every single month. In the next month, it'll automatically show you how much you have in savings based off of what you've been compiling so far. So I thought that was really cool for a spreadsheet to do that because it's hard to kind of make your own spreadsheet. So I have this spreadsheet attached because I thought it was a really useful, comprehensive tool. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can go ahead and click on that. I'll probably also share it with Derek so that way he can have it and send it to y'all if you watch this presentation in the future and you don't have access to this link. So that's a resource. Another resource is another version, this kind of, actually I can't really blow it up, but having a spreadsheet that looks like that, if you want a paper tracker and just write it out like that. You can also get physical journals. There's budgeting journals and budgeting planners for those of y'all who are physical and want a journal or a planner. But in general, any sort of budget that you have, like I mentioned in the very beginning, is going to have three main things: your income, your expenses, and what you were expecting. So your budget and what you're trying to stay within. And as long as you have those three main things and you make sure that you go about your budget in the 3 steps, which is A, making sure you pay your necessities first, second, making sure you pay yourself first and contribute to your savings and contribute to your debt repayments, and then third, allot the rest of your income towards your personal expenses and entertainment and things like that accordingly, you should be in good shape to make sure that you're able to keep on track and stay within your budgeting goals and not go beyond what you intended and set out for yourself. So in conclusion, there's ultimately no best attitude about money. Like I mentioned in the very first slide, your money mindset and your money attitude, there's ultimately no best attitude or one way to go about it. As long as you're able to know for yourself that money is a tool and it's here to work for you and help you live the life that you want, and that you don't have to feel constrained by money, then that's the best mindset to have, because ultimately money is there to make sure that you can achieve your goals and achieve the things that you want to achieve. And no budget you should never go into budgeting feeling like you have to constrain yourself in every single category, because ultimately you are in control of how much you're able to allot to certain things. And if you start budgeting after this presentation, hopefully you'll be able to see how freeing it is for you to be able to know that you can cover your needs, cover your savings and debt repayment and things like that, and then know that you have the freedom to allot your personal expenses and your entertainment expenses however you choose, because you were diligent about making sure that your other things were covered first. And maybe as you're going through this process and you realize that you don't have enough money to make the income that you want or to make the lifestyle that you want, then you are at the liberty and you have the knowledge to know that you've done everything you could, and maybe it's time to either get a different part-time job, another part-time job, or things like that. But in general, budgeting is really helpful because it allows you to make informed decisions. And making informed decisions is ultimately the best possible thing that you can do, because it makes things a lot less stressful down the road, because you're able to know and walk in confidence because you've been tracking your financial spending and your financial habits. So with that, it's important for you to know what you want and what your preferences are so your budget can work for you. That kind of goes along the lines of what I was saying. If you realize that you have a really big financial goal, but your income currently won't help you make that goal, you can start thinking about getting another job, or maybe getting a higher paying job so your budget can work for you. Maybe you realize that you need more in scholarship money or things like that, so you can start to initiate conversations with the financial aid office. All these things you can learn and start to realize by budgeting and by tracking your money and realizing if your income that you currently have is allowing you to live the lifestyle that you're looking for. So it's one of the pros and pluses of budgeting. And that concludes this event. I will take any questions that anyone has. If you have questions, or if you're watching this in the future and you don't have any questions now, or obviously you're watching in the future and you can ask questions, you can always email Derek, or you can email us at the Comet Cents at cometcents@utdallas.edu, and we'll be more than happy to either set up a one-on-one appointment with you and answer your questions, or just answer your questions via email. So I'll briefly talk about the things that we have coming up, and then transition into our contact information. So our events that we have coming up, we have two that are still happening. We have one at the end of this month in 2 weeks, October 28th, noon. It's managing credit. So if you are interested in learning about credit, maybe you have a credit card, maybe you don't, but you just want to know more about credit, we'll be talking about credit cards, credit scores, what that looks like, how to maintain a good credit score, how to lift up a credit score, just exploring those different options and scenarios. So highly recommend. It's a very informational presentation. And then the other one that we have in November, which is a little further away, is a financial risk plans for your future. And we talk about things like investment, retirement. So again, a really chock full of knowledge presentation, especially for college students, especially for first generation students. I knew absolutely nothing about investments or retirement or anything like that when I first started college. So it's a really great presentation. And it's again going to be at noon. And we also have a podcast. We started this podcast in January, Change Matters podcast. It can be found anywhere you can find podcasts. And this podcast is super cool, super awesome, because we take all of the subjects. We take budgeting, we talk about budgeting, we talk about loans, we talk about debt, we talk about college resources, specifically around the UT Dallas area. And we make it, we give a lot more anecdotes in the podcast. We talk about our own personal experiences as college students navigating finances. And it's a really cool resource, and it's different from our workshops because it's a lot more informal and it's more of a college student's take on how to navigate these things, college student to college student. And yeah, I think it can be a really great resource, especially for those who can't make it to workshops and things like that. But I highly recommend it if you can listen to it. All of the episodes in general are no more than 15 minutes. So it's a really quick listen. You can listen to it as you're doing your laundry or dishes or whatever, or driving. And hopefully you can learn a little bit more of some of the more practical things and just tips and tricks that we personally have used while navigating personal finance and financial literacy as college students. So yes, this is our contact information. We have office hours and appointments. These are our office hours. You can set up an during this time. If you are not available during those times and you still like to set up an appointment, you can email us and we can try and work something out with you. You can follow us on Instagram at Comet Cents. And like I mentioned, we have a podcast, the Change Matters podcast.
The First Generation Comets YouTube channel is your home for information and video content for first generation students and their families. You'll find information on our jargon dictionary, interviews with first generation alumni and staff, and much, much more. Please consider subscribing to First Generation Comets on YouTube and click the notification bell so you will be notified every time we premiere, upload, and go live. Welcome to UT Dallas. Welcome to the Comet family. Whoosh.